The moment he realized who she was, the entire room went quiet. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered across the polished marble floor, the sharp sound slicing through the soft jazz and low conversation like something that didn't belong, red wine spreading across a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and for a second nobody moved, not the diners, not the staff, not even the man standing at the center of it all, Daniel Whitmore. Because he wasn't looking at the stain on his jacket, he was staring at her face, at the woman kneeling slightly to clean up the mess, at the woman who wasn't supposed to be here, not like this, not wearing a simple black apron and sensible shoes, not with her hair tied back in a way that tried to disappear into the background. His voice came slower than expected, quieter too, like something caught between disbelief and memory. Emily. And the name hung there, fragile and heavy at the same time, because 3 years ago Emily Carter had walked out of his life with nothing but a suitcase and a silence he never bothered to understand, and now she was here, standing under dim restaurant lights, one hand instinctively resting over the gentle curve of her pregnancy, a detail that hit him half a second too late, making his breath stall just enough for the people around them to notice that something wasn't right. Emily didn't answer right away. Her eyes dropped to the floor, to the broken glass, to anything that wasn't him, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady but soft. "I'm sorry, sir." As if she didn't know him at all, as if he were just another customer to serve and forget. But the way her fingers tightened slightly around the cloth in her hand betrayed something deeper, something controlled, and Daniel felt it, that strange shift in the air, like the room had tilted without anyone else realizing. Behind him a woman's voice cut in, sharp and impatient, his date, polished and perfect. "Can someone fix this? This is ridiculous." And the manager rushed over, all apologies and forced smiles, directing attention away from Daniel's expression, away from the tension building in silence. But Daniel didn't move, didn't blink, because the last time he saw Emily she wasn't like this, she wasn't quiet, she wasn't invisible, she was standing in a sunlit living room arguing for something that mattered, and he had turned away from that version of her without hesitation, and now here she was, working a double shift in a place where people like him didn't notice people like her, except he had noticed, and that was the problem. "You're working here?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could reshape it into something colder, something safer. Emily nodded once, still not meeting his eyes. "Yes, sir." The word landed heavier than it should have, because it wasn't respect, it was distance, carefully built and deliberately maintained. And somewhere in the background a phone camera lifted just slightly, unnoticed by most, catching the moment as it unfolded, because what looked like an accident, like a simple spill in a high-end restaurant, was already becoming something else entirely, something slower, something inevitable. And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, felt like he had walked into a situation he didn't control. The manager's smile tightened as he glanced between them, sensing something he could not quite place. "Sir, we will take care of everything. Please allow us to move you to another table." But Daniel barely heard him, his attention locked on Emily as she carefully gathered the broken pieces, her movements precise, almost practiced, like someone who had learned how to stay composed no matter who was watching, and that alone unsettled him more than anything else, because the Emily he remembered had never been this controlled, never this distant. "Look at me," he said quietly, not loud enough for the room but firm enough that it carried weight, and for a moment she hesitated, just a fraction of a second, before lifting her gaze, and when their eyes met the air shifted again, not dramatic, not explosive, just a subtle tightening that made everything else fade into the background. There was no anger in her expression, no bitterness, just a calm that felt out of place, and that calm made Daniel uncomfortable in a way he could not explain. "You disappeared," he added, as if that were the part that mattered, as if the years between them had been nothing more than a gap in a conversation. Emily's lips pressed together briefly before she answered. "I moved on." Simple, clean, final, the kind of answer that closed doors instead of opening them. Behind Daniel his companion let out a soft, dismissive laugh. "This is unbelievable. Are we really doing this right now?" But Daniel did not turn around, did not acknowledge her, because something about this moment felt larger than the inconvenience of a ruined dinner. It felt like something he had not finished, something he had walked away from too easily, and now it was standing right in front of him wearing a name tag and holding a cleaning cloth. "You call this moving on?" he asked, gesturing slightly at her uniform, the words sharper than before, and for the first time a flicker passed through Emily's eyes, not hurt, not quite, but something deeper, something that disappeared as quickly as it came. "I call it working," she replied, her tone steady again, unshaken, and that steadiness began to draw attention, quiet at first, a few glances, a few murmurs, the subtle awareness that this was no longer just a service mistake but a story unfolding in real time, the kind people leaned into without realizing it. Near the edge of the dining room a man in a dark suit paused mid-step, his eyes narrowing slightly as he watched Emily, recognition flickering across his face though he said nothing, and just beyond him a small red light blinked from a phone camera angled discreetly toward the scene, capturing every word, every expression. Daniel noticed none of it. He was too focused on the question forming in his mind, the one that had been building since the moment he saw her. "And the baby?" he asked, the words quieter now, more careful, and this time Emily did not look away, her hand resting lightly against her stomach, a protective gesture that felt natural, instinctive. "Doing just fine," she said, and there was something different in her voice when she said it, something warmer, something real, a contrast to the calm distance she had shown him, and that contrast unsettled him even more, because it meant there was a part of her he no longer understood, a part he had no access to, and for the first time since he walked into the restaurant Daniel Whitmore felt like he was standing on the outside of something important, something he had once taken for granted and could not simply reclaim, and as the silence stretched between them, unnoticed by him, the room was no longer just watching, it was waiting. The silence did not break, it stretched, thick and deliberate, until the manager cleared his throat again, forcing a smile that no longer felt natural. "Emily, why do not you take a moment in the back?" But she did not move, not immediately, and that hesitation was small enough to miss if you were not watching closely. Daniel noticed it, and for reasons he could not explain it made him feel like he had just stepped into something already in motion, something that did not begin when he walked through the door. "No," Emily said softly, her voice calm but firm. "I can finish my shift." And that word choice landed differently than expected, not defensive, not apologetic, just controlled, like she was choosing every word instead of reacting, and the manager blinked, caught between authority and uncertainty, because something about the way she spoke did not match the role she was supposed to be playing. Behind them the man in the dark suit took a step closer, his attention now unmistakably fixed on Emily, while the faint glow of a phone camera shifted angle, capturing Daniel's expression as it tightened just slightly. "You really stayed here all this time?" Daniel asked, lowering his voice as if the room had suddenly become too crowded for honesty. Emily shook her head once, a subtle movement. "No, I came back." And there it was again, another answer that revealed nothing and everything at the same time. Daniel frowned, trying to place it, trying to understand what did not fit, because coming back implied intention, planning, something deliberate, and Emily Carter had never been someone who acted without purpose, at least not the Emily he thought he knew. "For what?" he pressed, and this time she did not answer right away, her eyes drifting briefly past him, not avoiding, not distracted, but checking, as if confirming something unseen, and in that single glance the man in the dark suit gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. Emily exhaled slowly and then looked back at Daniel, her expression unchanged. "For work," she said again, repeating the same simple truth, but now it sounded different, heavier, layered with something he could not quite reach, and that was when his companion leaned in, her tone sharper now, impatient and curious. "Daniel, we are leaving, this is unnecessary." But he still did not move, because the feeling had grown stronger, that quiet sense that he was missing something obvious, something right in front of him, and then it happened, subtle, almost invisible. The manager straightened his posture, his entire demeanor shifting from anxious to attentive, his eyes flicking past Daniel toward the entrance, and several staff members adjusted themselves in unison. Like a signal had just been given without a word spoken. The man in the dark suit stepped forward fully now, no longer observing, his presence drawing attention in a way that did not need volume, and he spoke, not loudly, but with the kind of authority that carried across the room without effort. "Miss Carter, they have arrived." And for the first time since the glass shattered, Emily moved before anyone else, not hurried, not nervous, just deliberate, placing the cloth down on the table with care, straightening slightly, her hand no longer resting protectively but confidently against her side, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a tone Daniel had not heard in years, one that did not belong to a waitress, one that did not ask permission. "Thank you," she said, and in that moment the balance of the room shifted so quietly that most people did not notice it happening, but Daniel did, and the realization came not as a shock, but as a slow, unsettling understanding that whatever he thought this was, he was already behind. The sound of the front doors opening was soft, almost polite, but it carried through the room like a signal that something important had just begun. Conversations lowered without anyone being told, heads turning subtly toward the entrance where two men in tailored suits stepped inside, followed by a woman holding a slim folder close to her chest, their pace unhurried yet precise. The kind of movement that did not seek attention but commanded it anyway. Daniel's eyes shifted in that direction. For only a second before returning to Emily, because she had changed, not physically, not in any obvious way, but in presence. The hesitation was gone, replaced by something steadier, something that felt familiar in a way he could not place. "What is this?" he asked, more to himself than to her, but Emily heard it, of course she did, and this time she did not lower her gaze, she did not soften her voice, she simply met his eyes with a calm that felt intentional. "Just timing," she said, and the answer made no sense until it did. The man in the dark suit stepped closer to her side now, no longer a silent observer but clearly aligned, his posture respectful in a way that reversed everything Daniel thought he understood about this room. "They are ready for you," he said quietly, and the words were not a suggestion, they were confirmation. Emily nodded once, then reached up and untied the apron from around her waist, the motion simple yet deliberate, as if she were removing a costume that had served its purpose. She folded it neatly, placed it on the edge of the table, and for a brief second her hand brushed against the surface, grounding, measured, before she turned fully toward the entrance, and that was when the manager moved, quickly but carefully, stepping aside with a level of deference that did not match his earlier authority. "Ma'am," he said, the single word slipping out before he could correct it, and that word landed harder than anything else had so far. Daniel's expression shifted, confusion sharpening into realization, because titles like that were not accidents, not in places like this, not from people trained to read hierarchy the way others read menus. "Ma'am?" his companion echoed, her tone uncertain now, the confidence she carried beginning to fracture. Emily did not respond to either of them, she simply walked forward, each step unhurried, steady, the room parting for her in ways so subtle they almost felt imagined, until she reached the group at the entrance. The woman with the folder stepped forward immediately, opening it with practiced efficiency. "Miss Carter, the documents are prepared, we just need your confirmation." And in that moment the last pieces fell into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty that made it impossible to ignore. Daniel felt it before he fully understood it, that shift in balance, that sudden awareness that whatever story he thought he was witnessing had never belonged to him. Emily took the pen offered to her, her fingers steady, her expression composed, and she signed, not hurried, not hesitant, just certain, and when she handed the pen back the man beside her inclined his head slightly. "Congratulations, the acquisition is now official." The word lingered in the air, acquisition, formal, deliberate, final, and the restaurant that had moments ago been a place of routine suddenly felt like something else entirely, a stage that had been set long before Daniel arrived, a stage where he was no longer the center, and as Emily turned back toward him, not to approach, not to explain, but simply to acknowledge, her eyes met his one more time. And this time there was no distance, no avoidance, just clarity. And in that clarity was something he could not undo, the quiet truth that she had never come back to serve tables, she had come back for something else entirely. The word acquisition did not echo loudly, but it settled into the room with a weight that changed everything, and Daniel felt it in the way people stopped whispering and started watching more carefully, in the way the manager's posture shifted from authority to deference, in the way the staff subtly repositioned themselves as if the entire structure of the place had just been rewritten in a single signature. "You bought this place?" Daniel asked, the question coming out slower than he intended, because he was still catching up, still trying to reconcile the woman he had just spoken to with the reality unfolding in front of him. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced briefly at the folder now closed in the assistant's hands, then back at him. "Not just this place," she said, her tone even, not boastful, not defensive, simply factual, and that answer landed deeper than anything else she had said so far. Because it expanded the moment beyond a single restaurant, beyond a single encounter, into something larger, something that suggested planning, strategy, time. Daniel let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "So what, this was all some kind of setup?" he asked, the edge in his voice returning, not anger, but discomfort trying to find its footing. Emily tilted her head slightly, considering him for a moment. "You walked in on your own," she replied, and that sentence, simple as it was, shifted the narrative again, because it removed intention from her and placed it back on him, and for a brief second Daniel had no response. Behind him his companion stepped back half a step, her earlier confidence now replaced with uncertainty. Her eyes moving between Emily and the people surrounding her, trying to understand the new hierarchy that had just formed. "This does not make sense," she muttered, but no one acknowledged her, because the focus had narrowed, sharpened, and Daniel could feel it, the subtle awareness that he was no longer the most powerful presence in the room. The assistant stepped forward again, opening the folder just enough to reveal a page. "We also received confirmation on the secondary holdings," she said, quietly to Emily, "including Whitmore Development's pending contracts." And that was the moment everything shifted from personal to undeniable. Daniel's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough, his jaw tightening slightly as the name of his company entered the conversation. "What about my company?" he asked, the question immediate now, no longer controlled. Emily did not look surprised, she did not hesitate, she simply met his gaze with the same calm certainty she had carried since the moment she removed the apron. "You should review your latest filings," she said, and the words were not a threat, not even a warning, just information. But the way she said it made something in Daniel's chest tighten, because he knew that tone. It was the tone used when outcomes had already been decided. Around them the quiet attention of the room deepened. The man with the camera adjusted his angle again, capturing the subtle change in Daniel's posture, the slight shift from confidence to calculation. Emily took a small step back, not retreating, just creating space, as if signaling that whatever needed to happen next did not require her presence at the center anymore. "I have a meeting," she said, her voice returning to that steady rhythm, and for the first time since recognizing her Daniel realized something he had not allowed himself to consider until now. This moment, this encounter, it was not the climax of her story, it was just a small part of it, and as she turned to leave, not hurried, not dramatic, just certain, Daniel Whitmore stood in the middle of a room he no longer controlled, holding on to a version of reality that was already slipping out of his reach. Daniel did not follow her immediately, but he did not stay still either. There was a tension in his movement now, a calculation forming behind his eyes as he watched Emily walk toward the private dining area, her pace unhurried, her posture steady, as if nothing about this moment required urgency. And that was what unsettled him most, not the acquisition, not the documents, but the complete absence of reaction, as if everything that had just happened was expected, planned, already accounted for. "Wait," he said louder this time, enough to carry, and the word stopped more than just her, it paused the room again, briefly, like a held breath. Emily turned back, not surprised, not impatient, simply acknowledging. "You are telling me you have something to do with my company now?" Daniel asked, the edge returning, but thinner this time, less certain. Emily studied him for a second, not dismissive, not emotional, just measuring. "I am telling you," she said slowly, "that your company has been part of a much larger deal for weeks. And the phrasing mattered, not a threat, not a claim, but a statement of fact, and Daniel felt it, the way certainty replaced assumption in her voice. "That is not possible," he replied quickly, almost reflexively, because in his world deals did not happen without his awareness, without his signature, without his control. But even as he said it, something in his mind began to shift, small details, recent emails, delayed responses, meetings that felt incomplete, pieces that had not made sense at the time now aligning in a way he did not like. The assistant stepped forward again, her tone professional and precise. "There was a restructuring of assets tied to your secondary investors," she explained, careful but clear. "Those interests have now been consolidated." And she did not need to finish the sentence, because Daniel understood what consolidation meant. It meant ownership, it meant leverage, it meant someone else now held pieces of something he thought was entirely his. His companion stepped closer to him, her voice low, uncertain. "Daniel, what is she talking about?" But he did not answer, because for the first time since he walked into the restaurant he was not thinking about Emily as his past, he was thinking about her as his present, and possibly his future. Emily took another small step back, creating distance again, not retreating but repositioning. "You should call your legal team," she said, and there was no malice in it, no satisfaction, just advice delivered too calmly to ignore. "You are enjoying this," Daniel said, trying to find footing, trying to reframe the moment into something familiar, something he could push against. Emily's expression did not change. "No," she replied. "I am finishing something." And that answer landed deeper than anything before it, because it implied duration, intention, something that had started long before tonight and was now reaching its conclusion. The man in the dark suit checked his watch briefly, then glanced toward Emily, a silent signal that time was moving whether Daniel accepted it or not. Around them the room had shifted completely, no longer curious, now attentive in a different way, as if everyone understood they were witnessing a turning point, not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. Daniel exhaled slowly, the confidence he carried when he entered now replaced with something more cautious, more aware. "This is not over," he said, not as a threat but as a statement he needed to believe. Emily nodded once, acknowledging without agreeing. "No," she said quietly, "it is not." And then she turned again, this time without pause, walking toward the waiting room where decisions were already being made, leaving Daniel standing exactly where he was, in the middle of a space that had quietly moved on without him. The door to the private dining room closed softly behind her, and for a moment the rest of the restaurant seemed to exhale, as if a pressure had been released. But Daniel did not feel that release, he felt the opposite, a tightening, a quiet urgency building beneath the surface as everything Emily said began to settle into place. He reached for his phone almost without thinking, stepping away from the table. His companion calling his name behind him, but he did not respond, because now the noise of the room had faded completely, replaced by the sharp clarity of numbers, contracts, timelines. He dialed quickly, pacing once, twice. "I need you to check something for me right now," he said the moment the call connected, his voice low but controlled. "All recent filings, investor movements, anything that looks out of place." There was a pause on the other end, then a cautious reply. "We were actually about to call you." And that was enough to confirm what he already felt. Daniel stopped moving, his grip tightening slightly on the phone. "What do you mean?" he asked, and the answer came slower, measured. "There have been some transfers, nothing illegal, but the structure has changed. Several holdings were consolidated under a new entity." Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, just enough to steady himself. "And who owns that entity?" he asked, though part of him already knew. The silence on the other end stretched just a little too long before the answer came. "It is registered under Carter Holdings." And that was it, not dramatic, not loud, just a name he had not taken seriously when it first appeared months ago in minor reports, a name he dismissed as irrelevant, too small to matter, and now it was sitting at the center of everything. Daniel ended the call without another word, lowering the phone slowly as the realization fully formed, not as a shock but as a series of connections locking into place. Every delay, every overlooked detail, Every quiet move he had not questioned, all leading here, back to her. He turned toward the private room. His steps more deliberate now, no longer reacting but trying to regain control. But when he reached the door he did not open it immediately, because for the first time he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of understanding, that whatever was happening inside that room was already decided, and stepping in would not change it, only reveal it. Behind him the restaurant continued, quieter now, more aware, the man with the camera still recording. Capturing not just the moment but the shift in power that had unfolded without spectacle. Daniel finally pushed the door open, just enough to see inside. Emily stood at the head of the table, not at the side, not in the background, but at the center, speaking calmly with the group that had arrived. Documents spread before them, her presence steady, undeniable, and in that single image everything became clear, not just what she had done, but how she had done it, quietly, patiently. Without needing to prove anything until the moment it mattered. Daniel did not step further inside, he did not interrupt, because he understood now that this was not a confrontation waiting to happen, it was a conclusion already reached, and as he stood there, watching from the threshold, Daniel Whitmore realized that the version of the story he believed in, the one where he had control, where he chose the ending, no longer existed, and it had not ended tonight. It had ended the moment he stopped paying attention, long before he ever walked through that door. He did not step inside, but he did not walk away either. Daniel remained at the threshold long enough to understand that what he was seeing was not a performance, not a moment crafted for his reaction, but a reality that existed with or without him. Emily's voice carried through the partially open door, calm and precise, discussing numbers, timelines, terms that Daniel recognized immediately, not as an outsider, but as someone who had built his career on those exact conversations, except now he was not part of it, he was listening from the edge, and that difference mattered more than anything else. "We will finalize the transition within 72 hours, Emily said, her tone steady, and one of the men across the table nodded. "All liabilities have already been accounted for." And that word liabilities struck deeper than the rest, because Daniel knew exactly what that could include: contracts, obligations, hidden risks, the kind of details that only surfaced when controls shifted. His phone buzzed again. This time he did not hesitate, he answered immediately, stepping further away from the door but not out of sight. "What else?" he asked, and the voice on the other end sounded more urgent now, less composed. "There is more exposure than we realized," his advisor said. "Some of the agreements were leveraged, tied to external financing, and those positions have been repositioned." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, the meaning clear. Repositioned meant controlled, redirected, owned by someone else. "Can we stop it?" he asked, the question direct now, stripped of pride, and the pause that followed told him everything before the answer came. "Not without significant loss." The word loss lingered, heavy, undefined, but Daniel understood the scale without needing numbers. He ended the call again, slower this time, the phone lowering as his focus shifted back to the room. Emily had not looked toward him once, not since he opened the door, not since he started to understand, and that absence of attention was not dismissive, it was complete, as if he no longer existed in the part of the story she was telling. Behind him the restaurant continued in low murmurs, but now those murmurs carried a different tone, not curiosity, but awareness, people who had seen enough to know something important had just happened, even if they did not understand all of it. The man with the camera was still there, quieter now, more deliberate, capturing not just the moment but the aftermath, the shift. Daniel stepped back from the door slowly, not retreating, but repositioning, the same way he had seen Emily do earlier, but it felt different when he did it, less controlled, more reactive. He looked around the room, really looked this time, noticing details he had ignored before. The staff's posture, the manager's careful attention, the subtle alignment of everyone toward the private room, all of it pointing to a single center of gravity that was no longer him. His companion approached cautiously, her voice softer now, uncertain. "Daniel, we should go." And for a moment he considered it, walking away, leaving the situation unresolved, but something held him there, not pride, not anger, but the need to fully see what he had missed, to understand how something this Significant had unfolded without him noticing. The door opened again, and Emily stepped out, not hurried, not dramatic, just composed, the conversation inside continuing without her. Because her role in it had already been completed, she walked past him, not stopping, not slowing, and as she did, she spoke quietly, just enough for him to hear. "You always looked at the numbers," she said, her voice even. "I learned to look at the timing." And then she continued walking, leaving Daniel standing. There was a realization that came too late to change anything, that while he was focused on what things were worth, she had been focused on when they would matter, and that difference had rewritten everything. Daniel stood there longer than he intended, the words she left behind settling into his mind with a clarity that made them impossible to ignore. Timing, it sounded simple, almost insignificant, but now it connected everything, the quiet months, the unnoticed shifts, the details he had dismissed because they did not immediately affect his bottom line, and for the first time in years he felt something unfamiliar. Not panic, not even fear, but a loss of certainty, the kind that made every next decision feel less predictable. He turned slowly, scanning the room again, but this time he was not looking for control, he was looking for understanding, and what he saw confirmed it. The restaurant no longer felt like a place he had entered, it felt like a place he had interrupted, something already in progress long before his arrival. His phone remained still in his hand, no new calls, no new messages, just silence where there should have been answers. His companion stepped closer again, her voice tentative. "Daniel, we need to talk about this." But he shook his head slightly, not dismissing her, just not ready, because whatever conversation needed to happen would not fix what had already been set in motion. Across the room the manager approached cautiously, his tone respectful, careful. "Sir, would you like us to prepare another table?" And that question, routine as it was, felt almost out of place, like an attempt to return the evening to something normal. Daniel looked at him for a second, then let out a quiet breath. "No," he said simply, because there was no version of normal left to return to. The manager nodded quickly and stepped back, understanding more than was said. Near the entrance the man with the camera lowered his phone slightly, not stopping, just adjusting, as if even he understood that what mattered now was not the beginning of the scene but what came after it. Daniel moved toward the exit slowly, not rushed, not defeated, but changed, each step measured in a way that suggested he was already recalculating, already shifting from reaction to response, and yet something remained unsettled. Something unfinished. He paused near the door, glancing back. One last time, not searching for Emily, but acknowledging the space where everything had changed, and in that brief moment he understood something that did not come easily to him, that control was not just about ownership, it was about awareness, about seeing the right moment before it arrived, and he had missed it, not because it was hidden, but because he had not been looking. Outside the air felt cooler, sharper. The noise of the city grounding in a way the restaurant no longer could. He stepped onto the sidewalk, the weight of the situation settling into something more concrete. Decisions would need to be made, calls returned, strategies rebuilt. But none of that would erase what had just happened. None of it would change the fact that someone he had once underestimated had moved ahead of him without resistance, without confrontation, without needing to prove anything until it was already done. Behind him the door closed quietly, separating the inside from the outside, the past from what came next, and as Daniel Whitmore stood under the dim streetlights, phone still in hand, one thought settled in with undeniable clarity. He had not lost control in a single moment, he had given it away piece by piece, long before he ever realized there was something to lose. The city noise did not feel the same anymore. It was still there, the distant hum of traffic, the soft echo of footsteps on concrete. But for Daniel everything seemed sharper, more defined, as if the world had shifted into focus in a way he had not experienced before. He stood still for a moment longer, then finally moved, stepping away from the restaurant without looking back again, his mind already working. Already rebuilding, because that was what he did. He adapted, he recalculated, he found a way forward, but this time the path was not as clear. His phone buzzed again, a new message, this one shorter, more direct. "We need to talk immediately." It was from his senior partner, not a suggestion, not a routine update, but a signal, Daniel exhaled slowly and typed back a single word. Where? The response came within seconds, an address, his office, and a time that left no room for delay. He glanced once more toward the restaurant, not out of attachment, but acknowledgement, then turned fully toward the street and signaled for a car. The ride across the city felt longer than usual, not because of traffic, but because of the silence. No music, no calls, just the steady movement of the car and the quiet replay of everything that had just happened. Emily's voice, her timing, the way she never reacted, only responded. The way she had already moved past the moment, while he was still trying to understand it, by the time he arrived at his office building the city lights. Reflected sharply against the glass, familiar, controlled, a place where he had always been certain of his position. He stepped inside, the lobby quiet at this hour, the security guard nodding respectfully, unaware that anything had changed. The elevator ride felt shorter than it should have, the numbers ticking upward with a steady rhythm that matched the tightening in his chest. Not panic, not fear, but pressure, the kind that comes when outcomes are no longer entirely yours to decide. When the doors opened, his partner was already waiting, standing near the conference table, sleeves rolled, expression serious. You saw it? Daniel asked before anything else, and the man nodded once, sliding a tablet across the table. It is everywhere, he said, and Daniel looked down, the screen already playing a video, the restaurant, the glass, the moment of recognition, Emily's calm, his questions, all of it captured clearly, the angle steady, the audio sharp enough to carry every word. Daniel watched for a few seconds, then paused it, not because he needed more time, but because he understood enough. How bad? He asked, and his partner did not hesitate. It is spreading fast. People are connecting it to the filings, to the restructuring. The narrative is already forming. Narrative, Daniel knew that word well. It was not just about facts, it was about perception, about how those facts were framed. And right now the framing was not in his favor. He set the tablet down carefully, his mind shifting again, from reaction to strategy, from what had happened to what could still be controlled. We contain it, he said, more to himself than to anyone else, and his partner shook his head slightly, not disagreeing, but grounding. We adjust, he corrected, and that distinction mattered because containment implied stopping something, while adjustment meant moving with it. Daniel nodded slowly, the realization settling in fully now. This was not a situation he could reverse, not quickly, not cleanly. It was something he would have to navigate, piece by piece, just as it had been built, and as he stood therein. The center of the room he once controlled without question, Daniel Whitmore understood something that had never been necessary before. Winning was no longer about staying ahead, it was about catching up. The room did not feel like his anymore, even though everything in it still carried his name, the glass walls, the polished table, the quiet hum of the city below, it all remained unchanged. And yet something fundamental had shifted. Daniel stood still for a moment, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the table as he looked at the paused image on the screen. Emily's face frozen mid-sentence, calm, composed, completely unaffected by the attention surrounding her. She knew, his partner said quietly. Not as a question, but as a realization, and Daniel nodded once, slow, deliberate. She knew exactly when it would matter, he replied, his voice lower now, less defensive, more precise, because that was the part that separated this from every other deal he had ever faced. This was not just about leverage, it was about timing, about understanding when visibility would amplify impact, when a private shift would become a public narrative. His partner tapped the screen lightly, bringing up another clip, different angle, same moment, but this one had captions already forming, comments building, interpretations spreading. People are already framing it, he said, and Daniel watched for a few seconds, not the video itself, but the reactions to it, the assumptions, the conclusions, the way a single moment was being expanded into a story that moved faster than facts could catch up. He reached out and turned the screen off, the room falling into a quieter kind of focus. We do not chase it, he said after a moment, and his partner looked at him, waiting. We redirect. Daniel continued, the words forming with more certainty now, because this was where he still had control, not in what had happened, but in what came next. We release our own timeline, our own data, before the market fills in the gaps for us. His partner considered it, then nodded slowly. That buys us space, he said, and Daniel nodded in return, but even as the strategy formed, even as the next steps aligned, something remained clear. This was not a situation that could be neutralized completely, not cleanly, not quickly, because the advantage Emily had created was not just structural, it was narrative, it was the perception of control shifting in real time, and perception, once established, was harder to reverse than any contract. Daniel moved away from the table, walking toward the window. The city stretching out below him in sharp lines of light and shadow, familiar, predictable, and yet now carrying a different weight. His phone buzzed again, another message, this one from a number he had not seen in years, no name, just a short line of text. You should have looked closer. And he did not need to ask who it was from, he did not need confirmation, because the tone, the timing, the simplicity of it, all pointed in one direction. He read it once, then again, before locking the screen and setting the phone down, not reacting, not responding, just absorbing. Behind him his partner spoke again. We can still stabilize this. And Daniel turned slightly, not disagreeing, but not fully agreeing either. We can adapt, he said, repeating the correction from earlier, because that was the reality now. This was not about restoring what was lost, it was about moving forward with what remained, and as he stood there, looking out over a city that no longer felt entirely under his influence, Daniel Whitmore understood something that had never been necessary before. Control was not something you held permanently, it was something you maintained, moment by moment, and the moment he stopped paying attention, someone else had taken it, not by force, not by confrontation, but by simply being ready when he was not. The night did not end with noise or confrontation, it ended with quiet movement, screens dimming, calls being made in lower tones, decisions unfolding behind closed doors where urgency replaced certainty. Daniel remained by the window longer than anyone expected, not because he did not know what to do, but because he understood now that every move carried more weight than before, every decision would ripple outward faster. Amplified by attention he could no longer control, his partner had already begun coordinating, voices in the background shifting from analysis to action. But Daniel stayed still, watching the reflection of himself in the glass more than the city beyond it, because for the first time in a long time he was not measuring numbers, he was measuring moments, the ones he had overlooked, the ones he had dismissed, the ones that had allowed everything to align without him noticing. His phone remained silent on the table behind him, but he knew it would not stay that way for long. By morning the narrative would be everywhere, analysts would speculate, investors would question, competitors would move, and somewhere within all of that Emily's position would remain exactly where she placed it, stable, deliberate, already integrated into the structure he once believed was untouchable. He turned slowly, walking back toward the table, his steps steady again, not rushed, not uncertain. Because while the situation had changed, the process had not. He still knew how to move forward, he still knew how to respond, but now he also knew something else, that not every move needed to be visible to be effective, not every strategy needed to be loud to succeed. He picked up the tablet again, not to watch the video this time, but to review the data beneath it, the numbers, the filings, the details that told the real story beneath the surface narrative, and as he scrolled through them, patterns began to emerge, not enough to undo what had happened, but enough to understand it more clearly. Emily had not rushed anything, she had not forced outcomes, she had waited, aligned, positioned herself where the shift would happen naturally, where resistance would be minimal, where the impact would be unavoidable, and that understanding settled into him with a clarity that replaced frustration with something more precise, respect, not for the outcome, but for the execution. His partner stepped closer again, watching him carefully. "What are you thinking?" he asked, and Daniel did not answer immediately. He set the tablet down slowly, his gaze lifting from the screen to the room around him, to the place that had once represented certainty and now represented something else entirely, evolution. "She did not beat us," he said finally, his voice calm, measured. "She moved before we did." And that distinction mattered because it shifted the focus from loss to timing, from defeat to delay. His partner nodded slowly, understanding the implication, and Daniel continued. So we stop reacting, he added, and we start anticipating again. The words were not dramatic, not forceful, but they carried direction, a shift in mindset that aligned with the reality he now faced. Outside, the city lights continued to move, unchanged by any of it, and inside the room the next phase had already begun, quieter, more focused, less certain but more aware, and as Daniel Whitmore stood there, no longer looking for control but for clarity, he understood that what had happened tonight was not the end of anything. It was the moment that forced him to see the game the way it had actually been played all along. Morning arrived without ceremony, just lights slipping through the glass and settling over a city that had already begun reacting, headlines forming, markets adjusting, conversations unfolding in offices Daniel had never stepped into, and yet he was already there in every one of them, not as the central figure he once was, but as part of a larger shift that had quietly taken shape overnight. He stood at the same window, coffee untouched beside him, watching the movement below not for distraction but for perspective, because everything now required it, every decision, every step forward. His phone had not stopped since early morning, messages, updates, questions, but none of them carried the weight of the one thing he had already accepted. That the structure he believed was stable had been redefined, not destroyed, not taken, but restructured in a way that no longer centered around him. His partner entered quietly, placing a printed report on the table without a word. Daniel glanced at it briefly, not rushing to read it, because the details would only confirm what he already understood. It is holding, his partner said after a moment, referring to the market, the company, the perception, and Daniel nodded once. For now, he replied, because stability was no longer something to assume, it was something to maintain. Actively, deliberately, and as he turned back to the window, something else settled in, not regret, not exactly, but clarity, the kind that comes too late to change the past but just in time to reshape the future. He thought back to the moment in the restaurant, not the glass, not the attention, but the stillness in Emily's voice, the absence of urgency, the quiet certainty that everything was already in place. And he understood it now in a way he had not before. She had not come back to prove anything, she had not needed to. She had built something that spoke without raising its voice, something that moved without asking for recognition until the moment it mattered, and that was the difference, not in power, not in resources, but in awareness, in patience, in timing. His phone lit up again, another message, another request for response, and this time he picked it up without hesitation, not because he was reacting, but because he was ready to move forward with a different understanding, a sharper awareness of what had been overlooked, what could no longer be ignored. And as he began to respond calmly, precisely, Daniel Whitmore no longer thought about what he had lost, he thought about what he had learned, because some losses do not take everything from you, they leave something behind, something quieter, something more valuable, the ability to finally see clearly. And somewhere across the city, in a room where decisions were already shaping the next phase of something larger, Emily Carter did not look back, did not check the reaction, did not measure the impact, because she did not need to. She had already moved past the moment, already positioned herself where the outcome would continue without her attention, and that was the final difference between them, not who had more, but who understood when enough had already been done. And in the quiet space between what was and what would come next, one truth remained: some men only realize what they lost when the person they underestimated no longer needs to be seen to be powerful.